Homeless black woman found crying at T bus stop under the rain. A millionaire stopped to help, then saw the birthmark on her wrist. Your wrist. Let me see your wrist. The man's voice trembled as he gripped her arm, his expensive suit getting soaked in the rain. I don't understand. What are you talking about? Kendra tried to pull away, confused and frightened, but he held on gently. His eyes fixed on something that made his face go completely white. That birthmark. How long have you had that birthmark? All my life. Why? What's wrong with you? His knees buckled. This millionaire in his $1,000 suit actually fell to his knees right, there on the wet pavement, staring at her wrist like he'd seen a ghost. Oh my God, it's you. After 28 years. It's really you. Kendra had been homeless for 6 months. Hungry. Invisible. Broken. She thought she knew rock bottom. But nothing could have prepared her for what this stranger was about to tell her. Nothing could have prepared her for the truth that a small crescent moon-shaped birthmark was about to reveal. But let me take you back to where this impossible story began. To a rainy night in Seattle. To a bus stop where a woman had given up on everything. To the moment one man decided to stop when everyone else just drove past. The rain fell in sheets that October evening. The kind of rain that soaks through every layer. That chills you to the bone. That makes the whole world feel cold and gray and hopeless. Kendra Washington sat at the bus stop on 5th Avenue, her thin jacket plastered to her skin. She'd been wearing the same clothes for 4 days. Her backpack, containing everything she owned in this world, sat beside her like a faithful dog. Inside that bag was one change of underwear, a toothbrush with flattened bristles, a photo of her grandmother, and a blanket that smelled like the streets. She pressed her face against her knees and wept. Cars rushed past, their headlights creating rivers of light on the wet asphalt. Umbrellas bobbed along the sidewalk as people hurried to warm homes. Restaurants glowed with golden light and the promise of hot food. The city pulsed with life all around her. But Kendra was invisible. She'd learned that about homelessness. It didn't just take your home. It took your humanity. People looked right through you. Or worse, they looked at you with disgust, with fear, with the kind of contempt reserved for people they considered less than human. The shelter's full. The voice of the intake worker still echoed in Kendra's head. Try again tomorrow. Tomorrow. She'd heard that word so many times it had lost all meaning. Tomorrow, the shelter would have space. Tomorrow, someone would hire her. Tomorrow, things would get better. But tomorrow never came. Kendra lifted her head and stared at the rain. She was 28 years old. She had a high school diploma and 2 years of nursing assistant training. She'd worked hard her whole life, paid her taxes, followed the rules, and somehow she'd still ended up here, sitting at a bus stop with 43 cents in her pocket and nowhere to go. How did it come to this? 6 months ago, she'd had an apartment in Rainier Valley. Nothing fancy, a studio with thin walls and a radiator that clanged all night, but it was hers. She'd had a job at Harborview Medical Center. She'd had a life. Then grandmother Dorothy died. Dorothy Washington had raised Kendra from the age of 3, adopted her out of foster care, worked 2 jobs to give her a good life, been her mother, her father, her whole world. When the cancer took her, it took Kendra's foundation with it. The grief was crushing. Kendra couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. She missed 3 days of work. Then a week, then 2 weeks. The termination letter came with sympathetic language about policies and procedures, but the result was the same. No job. Without income, the rent went unpaid. 1 month became 2. The eviction notice arrived on bright pink paper. She had 30 days. Kendra tried. God knows she tried. She applied to every hospital, every nursing home, every home care agency in King County. But without references from her last job, without a permanent address, without clean clothes for interviews, the rejections piled up. Nice to meet you, but we've decided to go with another candidate. We'll keep your resume on file. We're looking for someone with more recent experience. The 30 days evaporated. On day 31, the sheriff came with the lockout notice. Kendra stood on the sidewalk with her backpack and watched a stranger change the locks on the door to her life. The first week on the streets was the worst. The fear, the shame, the constant vigilance. She slept in doorways, woke to police officers shining flashlights in her face. Move along. You can't stay here. Where was she supposed to go? The shelter became her routine. Get in line by 4 p.m. Hope there's a bed. If not, find somewhere safe to sleep. Safe being relative when you're a woman alone on the streets. She learned the locations of soup kitchens. Monday, Wednesday, Friday at First Presbyterian. Tuesday and Thursday at the Catholic Community Services. Sunday at the mosque on Northgate. The food was hot and the volunteers were kind, but charity has a taste. A bitter aftertaste of shame that no amount of gratitude can wash away. She learned which businesses would let her use the bathroom, which ones called security the moment she walked in. She learned to avoid certain areas at night, to keep her head down, to make herself small and unobtrusive and invisible. And slowly, day by day, she felt herself disappearing. The woman she'd been, Kendra the nursing assistant, Kendra the granddaughter, Kendra the person with dreams and goals and a future, faded away. In her place was someone else, someone who smelled bad, someone whose hair was matted, someone people crossed the street to avoid. Now here she sat in the rain, crying at a bus stop, with nowhere to go and no one to call. She'd cut off contact with the few friends she had. The shame was too great. How do you tell people you're homeless? How do you explain that you're living on the streets? It was easier to just disappear. God, if you're listening, I could really use some help right now. Kendra wasn't even sure she believed in God anymore. But desperation makes believers of us all. Please, I don't want to die out here. Please, send me something. Anything. A sign that I'm going to be okay. The rain intensified. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Kendra pulled her knees tighter to her chest and closed her eyes. That's when she heard the car. The engine sound was different from the others. Smoother, quieter, expensive. She didn't look up. Rich people were the worst. They'd look at her with pity, then drive away in their luxury cars to their warm houses, feeling good about themselves for feeling bad for her. But this car stopped. The engine idled. A door opened. Footsteps approached. Kendra kept her head down. Maybe if she didn't acknowledge them, they'd leave. The last thing she needed was someone calling the cops on her for loitering. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was male, deep, concerned. Kendra didn't respond. "Miss, I know you can hear me. Please, I just want to help." Kendra lifted her head slowly. Through the curtain of rain, she saw him. A black man, tall, probably late 30s or early 40s. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her old rent. In his hand was a large black umbrella, and he was holding that umbrella over her, not himself. His suit was getting soaked. Rain plastered his hair to his head. Water dripped down his face. But he held the umbrella steady over Kendra, shielding her from the downpour. "I'm fine. Just waiting for the bus." Her voice came out hoarse. She couldn't remember the last time she'd really talked to someone. "There's no bus coming. Not for another 45 minutes. And you're not fine." He crouched down to her level, still holding the umbrella over her. His eyes were kind, dark brown, the kind of eyes that actually saw people. "My name is Julian Cross. I own a medical technology company downtown. I was driving home when I saw you sitting here and He paused. I couldn't just drive past. Kendra studied him warily. She'd learned to read people on the streets, learned to spot the ones with bad intentions. This man's concern seemed genuine, but she'd been fooled before. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something." Julian's expression softened with what looked like understanding. "You're right. I do want something. I want to make sure you're safe. I want to get you out of this rain. I want to help. I don't need help. I'm fine." Even as she said it, her body betrayed her. A violent shiver ran through her. Her teeth chattered. She was so cold she couldn't feel her toes anymore. "When's the last time you ate?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Kendra felt tears spring to her eyes. 2 days ago. A woman at the soup kitchen gave me some crackers." Julian's jaw tightened. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Or anger. Not at her. At the situation. "Please, let me take you somewhere warm. Get you a real meal. After that, if you want me to bring you right back to this bus stop, I will. I promise. No strings attached." Kendra wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it. She wasn't a charity case. She wasn't some damsel in distress waiting for a rich man to rescue her. But pride doesn't keep you warm. Pride doesn't fill your stomach. And the truth was, she was so tired. Tired of being cold, tired of being hungry, tired of fighting. What did she have to lose? Okay, thank you. The relief on Julian's face was unmistakable. Can you stand? I think so. Kendra tried to push herself up. Her legs, cramped from sitting in the cold for hours, refused to cooperate. She stumbled. Julian caught her arm to steady her. That's when it happened. As he gripped her wrist to keep her from falling, her jacket sleeve pulled back. And there, on the inside of her left wrist, was the birthmark, crescent moon-shaped, dark against her brown skin, about the size of a quarter. Julian froze. His hand tightened on her wrist. His eyes locked onto the birthmark. His face went completely pale. Your wrist. Let me see your wrist. I don't understand. What are you talking about? Kendra tried to pull away, suddenly frightened by the intensity in his eyes. That birthmark. How long have you had that birthmark? All my life. It's just a birthmark. Why? But Julian didn't answer. He just stared at her wrist like it held the secrets of the universe. His breathing quickened. His hands started to shake. I'm sorry. If this is going to be weird, I should just go. Kendra yanked her arm free and grabbed her backpack. No. Please don't go. Julian's voice cracked. He looked up at her, and there were tears in his eyes. You remind me of someone. Someone very important. Please, come with me. I'll explain everything. I promise. Just please don't leave. Something in his voice stopped Kendra. This wasn't some creep trying to take advantage of a homeless woman. This was a man who'd just seen something that shook him to his core. Against every survival instinct screaming at her to run, Kendra nodded. Okay, I'll come with you. Julian led her to his car, a black Mercedes S-Class. The interior was all leather and wood trim, and that new car smell. When Kendra sank into the passenger seat, the heated seat warmed her frozen body. She almost cried from the relief of it. Julian got in the driver's side but didn't start the car immediately. His hands gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. I need to ask you something. Do you know anything about your biological parents? Kendra's heart started to race. No. I was left at a hospital when I was 2 days old. The nurses found me in the emergency room. No note, no name, nothing. I went into foster care. My grandmother, Dorothy Washington, she adopted me when I was 3. She never knew who my biological parents were. I tried to find them when I turned 18, but all the records were sealed. What was your grandmother's name again? Dorothy Washington. She passed away 6 months ago. Julian closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. But why are you asking me this? What does my birthmark have to do with anything? Julian pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He scrolled through his photos for a moment, then turned the screen toward Kendra. The photo showed a young black woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old. She was beautiful, radiant. She sat in a hospital bed, wearing a gown, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. She was smiling, but there was exhaustion in her eyes. And on her left wrist, clearly visible as she cradled the baby, was a birthmark, a crescent moon, identical to Kendra's. That's my wife. Her name was Amara. This photo was taken 28 years ago. 2 days after she gave birth to our daughter. Kendra stared at the photo, at the woman who looked so happy, despite the exhaustion, at the tiny baby in her arms, at the birthmark that mirrored her own. I don't understand. Julian's voice was thick with emotion. Amara had complications during delivery, a placental abruption. She hemorrhaged. The doctors, they did everything they could. They managed to save the baby. But Amara, she didn't make it. She died 2 days after this photo was taken. I'm so sorry. That's terrible. Kendra's heart ached for this man's loss, but she still didn't understand what this had to do with her. I was 22 years old. Julian continued. I just finished my undergraduate degree. Amara and I had gotten married our senior year. We were so young, so in love, so unprepared for parenthood. And then suddenly she was gone and I had this tiny baby and I was completely lost. He took a shuddering breath. My parents, they meant well, but they didn't think I could raise a child alone. They said I needed to finish graduate school, build a career, get my life stable. They said the baby deserved 2 parents, a real family. Not a grieving single father who could barely take care of himself. No, the word escaped Kendra's lips as realization began to dawn. They convinced me to give her up for adoption. It was supposed to be a private adoption, open, so I could stay in contact. But they arranged everything, and when the papers came, I signed them. I signed my daughter away 2 days after I buried my wife. Julian turned to face Kendra fully. I was told the adoption fell through, that the family changed their minds. I tried to find out where she went, but my parents had sealed the records. Said it was better for everyone if I moved on. Made a clean break. I was so destroyed by grief, I didn't fight them, and I've regretted it every single day for 28 years. Kendra couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred with tears. You think I'm your daughter? That birthmark is genetic. Amara's mother had it. Amara had it. And according to the genetic testing we did before the birth, our daughter would have it too. It's rare, very rare, and you have it in the exact same location. It's just a coincidence. You're 28 years old. You were abandoned at a hospital 2 days after birth. You were adopted at age 3 by a woman through the foster system. The timeline matches perfectly. This is insane. You can't just decide I'm your daughter because of a birthmark. You're absolutely right. Julian composed himself, wiping his eyes. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. This has to be overwhelming for you. But please, regardless of whether you're my daughter or not, let me help you. You need food, medical attention, a safe place to stay. Let me provide that while we figure this out. And how exactly do we figure it out? A DNA test, if you're willing. It's simple. Just a cheek swab. We can send it to a lab and have results within a week. Then we'll know for certain. Kendra's mind reeled. This morning she'd been sitting at a bus stop with no hope. Now this stranger was telling her he might be her father. The father she'd wondered about her entire life. What if the test says I'm not your daughter? Then you're still someone who needs help, and I'm still someone who can give it. I have a large house with plenty of room. I'll make sure you're safe and fed and have access to resources. And after that, whatever you decide to do, I'll support. And if it says I am. Julian's expression was raw with hope and fear. Then I'd like the chance to know you, to be your father, if you'll let me. I know I have no right to ask that. I gave you up. I wasn't there for your first steps, your first words, your first day of school, your graduation. I missed everything. But I'd like to be there for whatever comes next. Kendra looked at this man, this stranger, this person who might be her father. Every logical bone in her body said this was too much, too fast, too impossible. But that birthmark, and the photo, and the timeline that matched so perfectly, and the fact that she'd prayed for help and minutes later he appeared. Okay, I'll do the DNA test, and I'll accept your help. Thank you. Julian's voice broke. Thank you for trusting me. You won't regret this, I promise. He started the car and pulled into traffic. As they drove through the rainy Seattle streets, Kendra stared at the birthmark on her wrist. The mark she'd always been self-conscious about. The mark that made her different. The mark that might have just changed everything. Where exactly are we going? My house. It's in Medina, about 20 minutes from here. Medina, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the Seattle area, where tech billionaires and professional athletes lived behind gates and security systems. Kendra looked down at her filthy clothes, at her dirt-stained hands. She probably smelled terrible. And this man was taking her to his mansion in Medina. I'm not exactly dressed for that neighborhood. You're dressed like someone who's been surviving. There's no shame in that. They drove in silence for a while. Kendra watched the city pass by through rain-streaked windows. Downtown Seattle gave way to the I-90 bridge. The bridge became tree-lined streets. The streets became estates. Julian's house appeared at the end of a long driveway. It was beautiful. Modern craftsman architecture, all windows and warm light, surrounded by manicured gardens that somehow still looked lush despite the October rain. This is your house? This is home. Julian pulled into a 3-car garage. A BMW and a Range Rover occupied the other spots. They entered through a mudroom into a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. White marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, an island bigger than Kendra's old studio apartment. A woman in her early 60s appeared from somewhere deeper in the house. She had gray hair pulled into a neat bun and wore sensible slacks and a cardigan. Mr. Cross, I didn't expect you home so early. Is everything? She stopped when she saw Kendra. Helen, this is Kendra. She'll be staying with us for a while. Could you please prepare the guest suite, and maybe find some comfortable clothes that might fit? To her credit, Helen's expression didn't change. No judgment, no questions, just professional courtesy. Of course. Miss Kendra, would you like some tea? Or perhaps hot chocolate? Hot chocolate sounds amazing. Kendra's voice came out small. She felt like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. And dinner, Julian added. Something warm and filling. I'll prepare chicken soup and fresh bread. Helen said. The guest suite will be ready in 20 minutes. After Helen left, Julian showed Kendra to a bathroom on the first floor. You can clean up here if you'd like. Take your time. There are fresh towels in the cabinet. Helen will bring clothes to the guest suite upstairs. Alone in the bathroom, Kendra stared at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, hair matted and tangled, skin dull from malnutrition. She turned on the faucet and washed her hands. The water ran brown at first. When was the last time she'd properly washed her hands? She washed her face. The soap smelled like lavender. She scrubbed away layers of street grime, watching the water swirl down the drain. When she finished, she looked slightly more human, but the haunted look in her eyes remained. 20 minutes later, Helen knocked on the bathroom door. Miss Kendra, your room is ready, whenever you'd like to go up. Kendra followed Helen up a curved staircase to the second floor. The guest suite was at the end of a hallway. Helen opened the door and Kendra gasped. The room was larger than any place she'd ever lived. A king-sized bed dominated the space, covered in a plush cream-colored duvet. There was a sitting area with a love seat and armchair. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, and an attached bathroom with a soaking tub that could fit 3 people. I've laid out some clothes on the bed, Helen said. They belong to Mr. Cross's late wife, Michelle. You look to be about the same size. I hope that's all right. It's more than all right. Thank you so much. There's a tray with hot chocolate and some fruit on the table. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. If you need anything at all, just press the button on the nightstand. It rings in the kitchen. After Helen left, Kendra walked slowly around the room, afraid to touch anything. Everything was so clean, so expensive, so far removed from the reality she'd been living. The clothes on the bed were soft and beautiful. Cashmere sweater, comfortable leggings, thick wool socks, a plush robe, everything in shades of cream and gray. But first, a bath. Kendra went into the bathroom and turned on the tub. The faucet had multiple settings. She chose the one that looked most relaxing. Steam rose as the tub filled. She found expensive-looking bath oils in a cabinet. Lavender, eucalyptus, rose. She poured in the lavender. Stripping off her filthy clothes felt like shedding skin. She left them in a pile on the floor, never wanting to see them again. The hot water was heaven. Kendra sank beneath the surface, letting the heat seep into her frozen bones. She stayed under until her lungs burned, then surfaced, gasping. She washed her hair 3 times. The first 2 times the water ran dark. The third time it finally ran clear. She scrubbed her body with a loofah, watching months of street life wash away. When she finally emerged from the tub, she felt almost human again. She dried off with towels so soft they felt like clouds. Put on the clothes Helen had left. Everything fit perfectly. The hot chocolate was still warm. She sat in the armchair by the window, sipping the rich, sweet drink and watching rain fall on the gardens below. This couldn't be real. Any moment she'd wake up at the bus stop, cold and wet and alone. But the hot chocolate was real. The soft clothes were real. The warm room was real. A knock on the door made her jump. Come in. The door opened slowly. A little girl peeked around it. She looked about 7 years old. Beautiful dark skin. Hair in 2 puffs decorated with colorful beads. Bright, curious eyes. Hi, I'm Grace. Are you the lady my daddy brought home? Kendra couldn't help but smile. I'm Kendra. It's very nice to meet you, Grace. Grace came fully into the room, studying Kendra with the unfiltered curiosity of children. Daddy said you needed help. Are you sick? I was very cold and hungry, but I'm feeling much better now. Good. Grace climbed onto the love seat, making herself comfortable. Daddy helps people a lot. He says it's important to be kind because you never know what someone's going through. He donated a whole wing to the hospital, and he gives money to shelters, and sometimes he brings people home like you. Your daddy sounds like a very good man. He is. He takes care of me and he works really hard, and he reads me stories every night even when he's tired. Grace paused, her expression becoming more serious. My mommy died when I was a baby. I never met her. Her name was Michelle. Daddy says she was beautiful and smart and loved me very much. Kendra's throat tightened. I'm sure she did. I'm sure she loved you more than anything. Do you have a mommy? She died a long time ago. Before I was born, my grandmother raised me. Her name was Dorothy. She was wonderful, but she died 6 months ago. Grace's expression turned deeply sympathetic. She got up and walked over to Kendra, patting her hand with the unconscious comfort only children can offer. I'm sorry. Being alone is hard. The simple statement brought tears to Kendra's eyes. This little girl understood loneliness in a way most adults refuse to acknowledge. Yes, it is. But you're not alone, are you? You have your daddy, and Helen, and my grandparents, and Aunt Tasha. But sometimes I still feel lonely, because there's a mommy-shaped hole that nobody else can fill. Kendra pulled Grace into a gentle hug. I understand that feeling. I have a grandmother-shaped hole, and a mommy-shaped hole too, I guess. They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment. Grace, baby, I told you to let Miss Kendra rest. Julian stood in the doorway, but his tone was gentle, not really scolding. I wanted to meet her. Grace said, she seems nice. She is nice. Now come on. Helen says dinner's almost ready and you need to wash your hands. Can Miss Kendra eat with us? If she feels up to it. Julian looked at Kendra questioningly. I'd like that very much. Dinner was served in a dining room that could seat 12 but felt cozy with just the 3 of them at one end of the long table. Chicken soup with vegetables and rice, fresh baked bread with butter, a simple green salad, and for dessert, apple crisp with vanilla ice cream. Kendra ate slowly, her stomach protesting at first, then gratefully accepting the nourishment. Everything tasted incredible, or maybe hunger was just the best seasoning. Grace chattered throughout the meal, telling Kendra about her school and her friends and her upcoming ballet recital. Julian watched them both with an expression Kendra couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or wonder. After dinner, Grace asked if Kendra could help with her bedtime routine. If you're not too tired, Julian said, but if you need to rest, she'll understand. I'm not too tired. They went upstairs to Grace's room. It was every little girl's dream. Painted lavender with white trim, a canopy bed with gauzy curtains, shelves full of books and dolls and stuffed animals, a reading nook with pillows and a small lamp. Grace picked out pajamas, purple with stars. Kendra helped her change, then sat on the edge of the bed, while Grace chose 3 books from her shelf. Daddy usually reads 2, but since you're here, maybe we can do 3? I think we can manage 3. They were picture books. Kendra read them with different voices for each character, making Grace giggle. By the 3rd book, Grace's eyelids were drooping. Miss Kendra? Yes, sweetheart. Will you be here tomorrow? I'll be here. And the day after that? Kendra glanced at Julian, who stood in the doorway. For a little while, yes. Is that okay with you? It's very okay. I like having you here. After Grace fell asleep, Kendra and Julian went back downstairs to his study. It was a masculine room. Dark wood, leather furniture, bookshelves lining the walls, a large desk with dual monitors. Julian poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to Kendra. Thank you for being so good with her. She's really taken to you. She's a wonderful little girl. You're doing an amazing job with her. I try. Julian sat in one of the leather chairs. Being a single father isn't easy, especially when you're running a company. But she's my priority, always. You mentioned her mother passed away. Yes, Michelle. We married when I was 30. Grace was born a year later. Michelle died from complications when Grace was 6 months old. Undiagnosed heart condition triggered by the pregnancy. I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. Losing Amara nearly destroyed me. Losing Michelle. Julian shook his head. But I had Grace. I couldn't fall apart. She needed me. So I kept going. He looked at Kendra intently. I ordered a DNA testing kit online. Expedited shipping. It'll be here tomorrow morning. The results take about 5 to 7 business days once we mail it in. If you're still willing, I'm willing. And you're okay staying here while we wait for the results? If you're sure I'm not imposing. Kendra, you're not imposing. If anything, having you here has already made a difference. Grace hasn't been this happy since. He paused. Since before Michelle died. She's been asking for a mother figure, someone who can do the things I can't. And here you are. I'm not a replacement for her mother. Kendra needed to make that clear. I know, and I wouldn't expect you to be. But you could be something else. Someone else important in her life. And if the DNA test says I'm not your daughter, what happens then? Then you're still someone who needs help, and I'm still someone who wants to provide it. I meant what I said. No strings attached. Stay as long as you need. Get back on your feet. That's all I want. Why are you really doing this? Julian was quiet for a long moment. When Amara died, I was surrounded by people. My parents, my friends, my professors. Everyone wanted to help, but they all had the same advice. Give the baby up. Move on. Stop grieving. Get your life together. They made me feel weak for being destroyed by her death. Made me feel incapable of raising my own child. He looked down at his hands. I regret listening to them every single day. I regret not fighting for my daughter. I regret putting my education and my career ahead of my child. I regret all of it. Julian looked up at Kendra with tears in his eyes. If there's even a chance that you're her, that after all these years, I might have found her, I have to know. And even if you're not, helping you helps me heal some of that regret. Does that make sense? Yes, it makes perfect sense. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The house creaked and settled around them. Rain pattered against the windows. Can I ask you about your life, before you ended up on the streets? Kendra took a sip of water. There's not much to tell. Grandmother Dorothy raised me in South Seattle. She worked as a housekeeper and a cafeteria worker. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. She made sure I stayed in school, stayed out of trouble, had opportunities she never had. She sounds like an amazing woman. She was. She had this saying, better isn't easy, but it's worth it. Whenever things got hard, she'd remind me that working towards something better was always worth the struggle. Is that why you became a nursing assistant? Yes. I wanted to help people the way nurses helped Grandmother Dorothy when she got sick. I couldn't afford nursing school, but I could do the CNA training. I got a job at Harborview. I was good at it. Patients liked me. I liked them. What happened? Dorothy got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She went from diagnosis to death in 6 weeks. I missed work to take care of her, to be with her, and when she died, I couldn't function. The grief was so heavy I couldn't breathe. I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, just sat in the apartment staring at the walls. By the time I pulled myself together enough to realize I was in trouble, I'd already been terminated. And without that job, I couldn't pay rent, couldn't afford anything. I tried to find work, but without references. She shrugged. The rest you know. I'm sorry you went through that alone. I had friends. But I pushed them away. I was ashamed. How do you tell people you're failing? That you're about to be homeless? It's humiliating. There's no shame in struggling, Kendra. Life knocks us all down sometimes. The question is, who's there to help us back up? Nobody was there for me. Until tonight. Until you stopped. Julian reached across and took her hand. The gesture was fatherly, comforting. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Kendra felt tears slide down her cheeks. When was the last time someone had promised to be there for her? Thank you. For everything. For stopping. For bringing me here. For the food and the room and... She gestured around. All of this. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You saved my life tonight. Then you're welcome. But Kendra, you saved yourself. You survived 6 months on the streets. You kept going when most people would have given up. That's strength. That's the kind of strength my daughter's mother had. The kind Dorothy must have had. And if you are my daughter, it's the kind of strength that runs in your blood. The words settled over Kendra like a warm blanket. She was strong. She'd forgotten that. The streets had a way of making you forget your own worth. I should let you rest. Julian stood. You've had an overwhelming day. Your room has everything you need, but if you think of anything else, Just let Helen know. Julian? Yes? What if the DNA test confirms I'm your daughter? What happens after that? Julian smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Then we figure it out together. I can't give you back the 28 years we lost. Can't undo the pain or the abandonment or any of it. But I can offer you a future, a family, a father, if you'll have me. And if I need time to process everything, then we take all the time you need. There's no rush, no pressure. We build something new, something honest, something real. I'd like that. After Julian left, Kendra got ready for bed. The pajamas Helen had left were soft flannel. The bed was like sleeping on a cloud. She should have fallen asleep immediately. She was exhausted, drained, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Could Julian really be her father? The coincidences were staggering. The birthmark, the age, the timeline, the hospital abandonment. It all fit too perfectly to dismiss. But what if it wasn't true? What if this was just a strange cosmic joke? What if she got her hopes up only to have them crushed? Kendra looked at the birthmark on her wrist. She'd always hated it. As a child, other kids had made fun of it, called it ugly, weird. She'd spent years hiding it under long sleeves and bracelets. Now that same birthmark might be the key to finding her father. She touched it gently, tracing the crescent moon shape. If you're up there, Dorothy, I could really use your guidance right now. Is this real? Is he really my father? What should I do? The house was silent. No answers came from beyond the grave. But Kendra felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever happened, she wasn't alone in that moment. She had a warm bed, a full stomach, safety. Tomorrow would bring answers. Warm bed, a full stomach, safety. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, Kendra Washington slept without fear. The DNA testing kit arrived at 9 the next morning. Julian brought it to Kendra's room with coffee and breakfast. Helen had made French toast, bacon, and fresh fruit. They sat at the small table in the sitting area of her room. Grace was at school. The house was quiet except for the soft classical music playing somewhere downstairs. How did you sleep? Julian asked. Better than I have in months. That bed is incredible. Good. I'm glad. He set the DNA kit on the table between them. I want you to know, you don't have to do this if you're not ready. If you need more time to think about it, we can wait. Kendra looked at the box. Inside was a simple cheek swab, one Q-tip rubbed against the inside of her mouth. That's all it would take to potentially answer the question that had haunted her entire life. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why was I abandoned? I'm ready. They opened the kit together. Julian swabbed the inside of his cheek first, sealing it in the provided tube with his identification number. Then Kendra did the same. The whole process took less than 5 minutes. Julian packaged everything according to the instructions and called a courier service to pick it up for immediate delivery to the lab. 5 to 7 business days. He said, we should have results by next week. What do we do? Until then, we live. We get to know each other. We let Grace continue adopting you as her favorite person. Kendra smiled. She's pretty great. She is. And she's completely smitten with you. Fair warning, she's going to ask you to do everything with her. Help with homework. Play dress up. Watch her practice ballet. If it gets overwhelming, just let me know. I don't think it'll get overwhelming. I like spending time with her. Good. Because I have to go into the office for a few hours today. If you're comfortable staying here with Helen and Grace after school, I'd appreciate it. Of course, I'm happy to help. After Julian left for work, Kendra spent the morning with Helen. The older woman showed her around the house. The library on the first floor, the home gym in the basement, the art studio. Julian had built for Michelle but rarely used now. The gardens out back with walking paths and a koi pond. You've worked for Julian for a long time? Kendra asked as they walked through the gardens. 12 years, since before he married Michelle. I started as a housekeeper, but after Michelle died, my role expanded. Now I manage the household, help with Grace, make sure Mr. Cross remembers to eat and sleep. Helen smiled fondly. He's a good man, works too hard, carries too much guilt, but his heart is pure gold. He told me about giving up his daughter, about the regret. Yes, he's never forgiven himself for that. I've worked for a lot of wealthy people, Miss Kendra. Most of them think money solves everything. But Mr. Cross knows it doesn't. He knows you can't buy back time, can't purchase redemption. All you can do is try to be better going forward. Do you think I'm his daughter? Helen stopped walking and turned to face Kendra. I've seen that photo of Amara 1,000 times. It's in his office. And the resemblance between you two. The same eyes. The same smile. The same birthmark. I'd be shocked if you weren't related. That scares me. Having a father who gave me up. What if he does it again? What if I'm not what he expected, and he decides it's too hard? Helen took Kendra's hands in her own. Mr. Cross is not the same man he was at 22. He's spent 28 years becoming someone worthy of being a father, and if you are his daughter, he will move heaven and earth to make up for lost time. That man doesn't do anything halfway. The words comforted Kendra more than Helen probably knew. Grace came home from school at 3:30, bursting through the door with energy and excitement. "Miss Kendra," she shouted, "I told everyone at school about you, and my teacher said you can come to career day if you want, and we're doing art in class tomorrow, and I need help with my math homework, and can we make cookies?" "Grace," Helen said gently, "take a breath, child." But Kendra laughed. The pure joy in Grace's voice was infectious. "Let's start with homework. Then if there's time, we can make cookies." They sat at the kitchen island, Grace's math workbook spread between them. Second grade addition and subtraction. Grace struggled with word problems. If Sally has 8 apples and gives 3 to her friend, how many does she have left? Grace frowned, counting on her fingers. 6. Let's try using actual objects. Kendra found 8 grapes in the refrigerator. She laid them out. "Okay, here's 8 grapes. These are Sally's apples. Now, if she gives 3 to her friend, we remove 3 grapes." She moved 3 grapes to the side. "Now how many are left?" Grace counted the remaining grapes. 5. "Oh, it's 5, not 6. "Exactly. Now you try the next problem using grapes." They worked through the homework using fruit and crackers and whatever else Kendra could find to make the problems tangible. By the end, Grace understood. "You're a good teacher." Grace said, "Better than my daddy. He just tells me the answer when I get frustrated. Teaching is about helping people figure it out themselves. That way they remember." "Did you want to be a teacher?" "I wanted to be a nurse. Still do, actually. You should do it. Daddy says you're never too old to follow your dreams. Your daddy is a smart man." After homework came cookies. Chocolate chip. They made a mess. Flour on the counter. Chocolate chips spilling onto the floor. Grace got dough on her nose. But the kitchen filled with the smell of baking cookies and the sound of a little girls' laughter, and Kendra felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like she was home. Julian came back at 6, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. He stopped when he saw Kendra and Grace at the kitchen table, frosted cookies between them, both giggling over some shared joke. "What did I miss?" "Daddy." Grace ran to him. "We made cookies, and Miss Kendra helped me with homework, and we're going to watch a movie after dinner, and you have to watch with us." "Is that so?" Julian smiled at Kendra over Grace's head. "Yes," Grace said firmly. "It's a family movie night." The word hung in the air. "Family. That sounds perfect," Julian said softly. They ate dinner together. Helen had made lasagna. Afterward, they settled in the media room, a cozy space with a large screen and comfortable sectional sofa. Grace chose an animated movie about a princess who saved herself. Halfway through, Grace fell asleep between Julian and Kendra, her head on Kendra's lap. "She's out," Kendra whispered. "She always falls asleep during movies. Claims she won't, but she always does." Julian gently lifted Grace into his arms. "I'll be right back." Kendra sat in the quiet media room, the movie still playing to an audience of 1. She looked around at this life, this house, this family, and wondered if she could really be part of it. Julian returned a few minutes later. She didn't even wake up when I tucked her in. He sat back down on the couch, but closer to Kendra this time. "Thank you for today. Helen told me you helped Grace with homework and spent the afternoon with her. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. She's easy to love." "She is." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Kendra said. "Anything. What was Amara like?" Julian's expression softened with memory and grief. "She was." He paused, searching for words. "Radiant. That's the best word I can think of. She lit up every room she entered. She was studying to be a doctor, wanted to work in underserved communities. She had this passion for helping people that was almost contagious. He pulled out his phone and showed Kendra more photos. Amara at their college graduation, laughing. Amara on their wedding day, beautiful in a simple white dress. Amara pregnant, glowing. We met freshman year. Julian continued. She was pre-med. I was engineering. We had a chemistry class together and she asked to borrow a pencil. Such a simple thing. But when she smiled at me, I was done for. How long were you married before she died? 4 years. We got married right after graduation, against everyone's advice. People said we were too young, but we knew. When you find the right person, age doesn't matter. His voice thickened. When she got pregnant, we were terrified and excited. We didn't have much money. I was in grad school. She was applying to med schools. But we wanted that baby so much. What happened during the delivery? Placental abruption. The placenta separated from the uterine wall. It caused massive hemorrhaging. They did an emergency C-section, got the baby out. But Amara, there was too much damage. They tried everything. Blood transfusions, surgery. But 2 days later, her organs started failing. She died, holding our daughter. I'm so sorry. Kendra's heart ached for this man's loss. The worst part was she never got to really know our daughter. Held her for maybe 10 hours total before she was too weak. She named her, though. Said the baby's name should be Hope, because even in all that darkness, our daughter was Hope. Hope. Kendra tested the name. That was my name? Before the adoption? According to the birth certificate, yes. Hope Amara Cross. Something shifted in Kendra's chest. Hearing her birth name felt like finding a missing piece of herself. What changed it? Foster care. When they couldn't locate any family, you became a ward of the state. They gave you a placeholder name, Baby Girl Washington. When Dorothy adopted you, she chose Kendra. Do you think Dorothy knew? About you? About Amara? I don't know. The adoption was supposed to be private and open. But my parents worked with a lawyer who specialized in closed adoptions. They wanted to make sure I couldn't change my mind. By the time I realized what they'd done, the trail was cold. How did you try to find her? Find me? When I turned 25, I hired a private investigator. But with the sealed records and the closed adoption, he hit dead ends everywhere. The lawyer who handled it had retired and destroyed his files. The agency my parents used had gone out of business. It was like my daughter had vanished into thin air. Julian looked at Kendra with tears in his eyes. I never stopped looking, though. Every year on her birthday, I'd search again. New investigator, new leads, always hoping this would be the year I found her. Found you, and now here I am. Here you are, at a bus stop in the rain with the same birthmark as her mother. The same age, the same history. Either this is the most incredible coincidence in human history, or it's fate. Which do you think it is? Fate. Definitely fate. They talked late into the night. Julian shared more stories about Amara, about their courtship, their dreams, their plans for a future that was stolen by tragedy. Kendra shared stories about Dorothy, about growing up in South Seattle, about the struggles and the love and the lessons that shaped her. And slowly, two strangers connected by loss and hope and a crescent moon birthmark began to feel like family. The week waiting for DNA results was the strangest of Kendra's life. She woke each morning in luxury, still half expecting it to be a dream. But the soft sheets were real. The hot breakfast was real. Grace's laughter was real. Julian went to work, but came home early each evening. They'd have family dinners, help Grace with homework, watch movies, play board games, build a routine that felt natural and right. Kendra spent her days with Helen, learning about the house, about Grace's schedule, about Julian's preferences. But more than that, she spent time rediscovering herself. She hadn't looked in a mirror, really looked, in months. Now she studied her reflection. The woman staring back was gaining weight. Her cheeks were filling out. The dark circles under her eyes were fading. Her hair, properly washed and conditioned, fell in natural curls around her face. She looked like herself again. One afternoon, Julian came home with shopping bags. I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I thought you might need some clothes of your own. Inside the bags were jeans, sweaters, dresses, shoes, everything in her size. Everything beautiful but practical. Julian, this is too much. It's not enough. Besides, Grace helped me pick everything out. If you don't like something, blame her taste. Grace appeared from behind him, grinning. I picked the purple sweater. Purple is your color. Kendra held up the sweater. It was beautiful. Soft cashmere in a deep plum shade. It's perfect. Thank you both. That evening, Kendra wore the purple sweater to dinner. Grace beamed with pride. Julian couldn't stop smiling. On day 5 of waiting, Julian asked Kendra to come to his office. She found him at his desk, looking at his computer with an expression she couldn't read. Is everything okay? Yes. He turned the screen toward her. I've been thinking about next steps. Regardless of what the DNA test says, you're going to need support getting back on your feet. So, I made some calls. On the screen was information about nursing programs, financial aid, scholarship opportunities. I reached out to the University of Washington and Seattle University. Both have accelerated nursing programs. Both offer significant financial aid for non-traditional students. If you're interested in finishing your degree, I'd like to help you apply. Kendra stared at the screen, at the opportunity being handed to her. I can't afford. You'd be working here, helping with Grace, managing some household things. That comes with a salary, a real salary, enough to pay for school and living expenses. And there are scholarships you'd qualify for. Why are you doing this? Because you deserve a future, Julian said simply. You deserve to achieve your dreams. And whether you're my daughter or not, I want to help make that happen. Kendra felt tears slide down her cheeks. No one's ever believed in me like this. Then they were fools. You're brilliant, strong, capable. You just need someone to invest in you, the way Dorothy did. Can I think about it? Of course. There's no rush. Just know the option is there. That night, Kendra lay in bed thinking about the future, about nursing school, about a career helping people, about building a life instead of just surviving. It felt possible. For the first time in months, her future felt possible. On day 7, the email came. Julian was in his office when the notification popped up. Results available. His hand shook so badly he could barely type his password. He opened the report. Read the first line. Then read it again. Then he called for Kendra. She came running, Grace right behind her. Is it the results? Grace asked. Are you sisters? Not sisters, sweetie, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Kendra, tears streaming down his face. The report says, he could barely get the words out. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Kendra, you're my daughter. You're really my daughter. The room spun. Kendra's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, staring at Julian. Say it again. You're my daughter. I'm your father. The test proves it. 28 years of questions. 28 years of wondering. 28 years of feeling incomplete. All of it came crashing down in that moment. Kendra burst into tears. Julian crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I gave you up. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry for everything you went through. I'm so sorry. You found me. That's what matters. You found me. They held each other, crying, grieving the lost years while celebrating the miracle of reunion. Grace wormed her way between them, hugging them both. So, Miss Kendra really is my sister? Yes, baby. She's your sister. I told everyone at school I had a big sister now. They didn't believe me. But I was right. Through her tears, Kendra laughed. Yes, Grace, you have a big sister. The best big sister ever. They sat together on the floor of Julian's office, holding each other, crying and laughing. A family reunited by a birthmark and a rainy night and fate. Later, after Grace went to bed, Kendra and Julian sat in the living room. The DNA report lay on the coffee table between them. Physical proof of what their hearts had already known. What happens now? Kendra asked. Now we build a relationship. Now I get to be your father. If you'll let me. I want that. But, Julian, I need you to know. I'm angry. The honesty surprised them both. You should be. I'm angry that you gave me up. That I grew up without a father. That I spent my whole life wondering who I was and where I came from. That I ended up homeless while you lived in a mansion. I know it's not fair. I know you were young and grieving, and your parents pressured you, but I'm still angry. You have every right to be." Julian's voice was steady. "I failed you. I chose my education and my career over my child. There's no excuse for that, and I can't undo it. All I can do is promise to never fail you again. How can I trust that? You probably can't. Not yet. Trust has to be earned, so I'll earn it, day by day, year by year, however long it takes. I'll prove that I'm the father you deserved all along." Kendra looked at this man. Her father. She'd spent her whole life imagining what her parents were like. She'd created 100 different stories. None of them included this. "I need time to process all of this, to figure out how to be your daughter. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of revelation settling over them. "Can I ask you something?" Kendra finally said. "Anything. Why did you really stop that night?" "At the bus stop?" Julian considered the question. "Honestly, I'd just left a board meeting where we'd been discussing our company's charitable initiatives. I'd argued that we should do more for homeless populations, provide job training, transitional housing, real support. And on my drive home, I saw you sitting there in the rain. And I thought, what good is all my money and influence if I just drive past someone in need?" He paused. "I almost didn't stop, almost convinced myself someone else would help. But then I remembered Amara. She never walked past someone in need, never looked away. And I thought, what would she do? So I stopped. Divine intervention. Maybe, or maybe just basic human decency. Either way, I'm grateful I did. So am I." Kendra reached over and took her father's hand. "I'm grateful you found me, Dad." It was the first time she'd called him that. Dad. The word felt foreign and right all at once. Julian's face crumpled. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I'm grateful I found you too, Hope. Kendra, I'm sorry. It's okay. I'm both. Hope and Kendra. Your daughter and Dorothy's daughter. All of it. All of it," Julian agreed. They sat together, father and daughter reunited, holding hands and looking toward a future neither could have imagined. Outside, the rain had stopped. Stars emerged in the clearing sky. And in that moment, everything felt possible. The morning after the results, the house felt different in a way that was impossible to describe. Not louder, not brighter, just truer. Like some invisible hinge had clicked into place and the doors that used to creak now swung open without complaint. Kendra woke to the sound of rain tapping the windows and the smell of cinnamon drifting up the stairs. Helen had baked something. Down the hallway, the quiet, sleepy thump of Grace's feet, a little body heading toward the day. She lay in bed a moment longer, her hand on the crescent moon at her wrist. All those years she'd hidden it under sleeves and bracelets. Now she touched it the way you touch a keepsake. Dad. The word still startled her in her own head, but thinking it didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a beginning. When she came downstairs, Grace attacked her waist in a hug. "You're really my sister," she said into Kendra's sweater. "Really your sister." Julian stood at the stove in shirt sleeves, out of place and domestic, stirring oatmeal like the future depended on it. "Good morning." He said it carefully, as if even a greeting could be too much too fast. Kendra appreciated the gentleness, the restraint. Love didn't have to be loud to be real. They ate together, Kendra demolishing a bowl of oatmeal and 2 slices of toast with honey, her appetite finally catching up to safety. Julian and Grace told her about Saturday plans: library, a stop at Pike, place market if the rain let up, movie night with too much popcorn, ordinary things. A family's weekend. After breakfast, Julian caught Kendra's eye over Grace's head. There was a question there, and a request. "I made an appointment," he said later in the study, voice low, "for a doctor and a therapist I trust. No pressure, just options. Let me set some things up for you. Let me be your father." The words came without flourish. He wasn't offering a fix. He was offering presence. "Okay," she said, "but slowly, my pace." "Your pace," he agreed. They built their first week as father and daughter out of small things, tiny bridges across 28 lost years. Kendra folded laundry with Helen at the kitchen island, while Grace drew ballerinas on wide-ruled paper and announced she'd choreograph a show for the living room. They grocery shopped, Kendra sliding essentials into the cart without doing the math of how many dollars remained in her pocket. Because she was finally allowed not to, she helped Grace with a diorama about the life cycle of salmon, using blue cellophane for water and tiny pebbles for a riverbed, Grace's tongue peeking out between her teeth as she concentrated. On Tuesday afternoon, Kendra stood in front of a whiteboard in room 12 of Maple Ridge, elementary for career day because Grace had asked, and because saying yes felt like healing. I used to work as a nursing assistant, she told a room of 7-year-olds wiggling on an alphabet rug. I want to become a registered nurse. Nurses help people when they're scared or sick. Sometimes the most important thing we do is hold a hand. Hands shot up like popcorn. Do nurses give shots? Sometimes, but we're really good at making them fast. Do nurses get to wear pajamas at work? Scrubs are like pajamas, she admitted, and the room erupted in delight. On the drive home, Grace held Kendra's hand in the back seat like they'd done it all their lives. You were so good, Grace said. Can you come to every career day forever? We'll see, Kendra said, laughing. That night, Kendra opened a notebook in the quiet of the guest suite, her room. Helen had started calling it, but the word felt temporary, and wrote a list. It wasn't fancy, just a pen and a page, her handwriting steadier than it had been in months. Nursing school, finish, apply, therapy, keep going, be honest, routine, sleep, eat, move body, call the DMV, ID, replace, reach out to Sherry. If ready, talk to Dad about Dorothy's photo albums. The last line made her pause. Dorothy's albums, the pictures she'd kept in shoeboxes under the bed, the ones that might hold answers to questions Kendra hadn't known she could ask. She closed the notebook and let the house's quiet hold her. Therapy started on a Thursday, the rain thick and soft, the world softened to watercolor behind the windshield. Dr. Okafor's office was in a converted Craftsman near Volunteer Park, lights spilling in from tall windows, plants thriving in the corners. You can sit wherever feels safe, Dr. Okafor said, a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and the kind of patience you can hear in someone's breathing. We can go at your pace. I'm good at surviving, Kendra said by the second session, words reluctant at first, then tumbling. I'm less good at not bracing for impact. Tell me what bracing looks like, Dr. Okafor said. Not asking for help, not needing anyone, leaving before I can be left, not looking at the birthmark. Kendra glanced down on reflex, then back up. For the first time, she let someone watch her do it. It used to feel like a brand, she said. Proof that I was different. Now, it feels like a breadcrumb. Like I followed it home. They talked about homelessness in terms that didn't reduce her to a circumstance. They named the ways shame settles under the skin like a second, colder self. They talked about Dorothy and the 6 weeks that reconfigured Kendra's life into before and after, how grief had made even the air heavy, and then had taken even that. You're allowed to be angry, Dr. Okafor said one afternoon, rain ticking steadily against the windows. Anger is information. It tells us where the wound is. I already told him I was, Kendra said, the night we got the results. And what would anger want to say now? It would say that I hate that he signed those papers, that I hate that his parents made it easier to erase me than to fight for me, that I hate the part of me that wants to make it easy for him now. Say those things to him, Dr. Okafor said gently, not to punish, to tell the truth. Honesty is how we stop bracing. It took Kendra 3 days to gather the words, and then she found him in the garden by the koi pond, the sky a rare winter blue, steam rising from the surface of the water into the chill. He sat on the stone bench, elbows on his knees, like he had been rehearsing his own truth. She sat beside him. I need to say some things out loud, she said. Say them. I hate that you signed those papers, she said, voice steady. I hate that your parents thought I was an inconvenience. I hate that I had to be strong for so long because the people who should have protected me didn't. I hate that. I still want to make things easy for you. I hate that after 6 months. On the streets, I'm here, and that makes me feel grateful and guilty at the same time. I hate that it hurts to love you. Julian stared at the koi, gold flashes below the surface, then nodded. I hear you, he said. I hated me for signing them. I hate that my parents' fear was stronger than my backbone. I hate that my weakness made your life harder. I hate that I can't fix it. And I love you enough to hold your anger without making you carry mine. The words landed between them, without needing to be explained. No one asked for forgiveness. It began anyway. On Sunday, they went to Lakeview Cemetery to visit Dorothy's grave, the city spread below like a promise. Kendra carried white lilies because Dorothy had loved simple flowers, nothing too fussy. She knelt in the damp grass and traced the letters of her grandmother's name with her thumb. "Hi," she whispered. Then, because the day asked for more than whispering, she said a whole thing. "I found him. He found me. I know you would have kept every door open. I'm going to try to do this the way you would have. Better isn't easy, but it's worth it." Julian stood back while she spoke, head bowed, hands in his pockets, like a boy at church waiting for the ritual to tell him who to be. When Kendra stood, he didn't try to hug her. He just held the umbrella over both of them when the rain started and followed her pace back to the car. 2 weeks after the results, Tasha flew in from Oakland, a burst of color in, a mustard coat and hoop earrings, laughter going ahead of her like a herald. "Look at you," she said when she saw Kendra. "My niece. My God, you have Amara's eyes. Come here and let me love you." Kendra didn't brace. She let herself be pulled into a hug that smelled like coconut oil and bergamot, and something inside her that had stayed clenched, unclenched by half. They spent the afternoon in the kitchen, Tasha and Helen trading recipes while Grace made a mess with sprinkles. And Julian pretended he knew the difference between cilantro and parsley, and Tasha called him out. "You never learned your greens," she scolded, and he grinned, grateful for a sister who refused to let tragedy calcify into silence. Julian's parents came the following weekend. Kendra sat in the living room in the purple sweater Grace had chosen for her. Weeks earlier, the one that made her feel like she belonged in her own skin. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and baking bread. Rain streaked the windows. They arrived at 2 o'clock, punctual and careful. His mother wore pearls and a serious mouth. His father had the posture of a man who had led people through busy lobbies and never waited in lines. Kendra stood. So did Julian. So did Grace, whose small hand found Kendra's. His mother saw the joined hands first and went rigid, then breathed and softened, aged another decade, and then came back. "Kendra," she said, and her voice caught on the name. "I am sorry." The words were not an excuse, not a plea. Just a stone laid on the ground across a river. "We thought we were protecting our son," his father said, voice rough. "We did harm. We can't make it right. We can only ask you to tell us who you are now so we can love you as you are." Kendra's mouth was dry, but her voice worked. "I'm Kendra Washington," she said, steady. "I'm a nursing assistant. I'm going to be an RN. Dorothy was my grandmother. She saved me. I spent 6 months homeless after she died. Your son found me in the rain and brought me home. I'm angry. I'm also grateful. I don't know what I can give you, but I can listen. And we can go slow." His mother's face crumpled. She took a step forward and stopped, asking permission without words. Kendra nodded tightly and allowed the hug. His mother cried the cry of someone who had held a story wrong for a long time and was finally putting it down. They stayed for tea and too many pastries, for stories about Amara that made Kendra both ache and feel fed. They brought a velvet box with a bracelet Amara's mother had given her on her 21st birthday. A thin gold chain with a tiny crescent charm. "We were saving it," his mother said, voice shaking. "We didn't know what for, and now we do, if you want it." Kendra took the bracelet and didn't put it on. She held it like something living, like it might start singing. "Thank you," she said. After they left, Kendra sat on the floor in her room, back against the bed, the bracelet in her palm. She thought about how forgiveness wasn't a door but a hallway, long and lightless in places, with multiple exits and re-entries, and how walking it required stamina she didn't always have. She thought about how sometimes it was enough just to stand at the threshold. She took the bracelet to the window and held it up to the late afternoon light. The charm threw a tiny crescent onto her wrist. She lined it up with her birthmark, metal to skin, and for a second the 2 moons were one. Days stacked into weeks in a way that felt like building instead of treading water. Kendra kept her appointment with a primary care physician at Harborview and listened without flinching. When the doctor told her she was malnourished and anemic and healing would take time, she let Helen show her family recipes for chicken soup with ginger and garlic, for collards with smoked turkey, foods that tasted like care. She walked with Grace after dinner in the garden paths even when it sprinkled, the little girl returning to the koi pond like a friend. She toured 2 nursing programs with Julian, UW and Seattle U, standing in glossy lobbies, touching the backs of auditorium chairs, imagining her body in these spaces as a student instead of a visitor. At UW, they paused outside the simulation lab, watching a cohort work on a dummy who breathed and blinked and complained. "They're practicing listening," Kendra said, as a student crouched to explain something at eye level to a plastic man. "That's the part school can't teach but has to try." "You'll be good at this," Julian said. "You already are." At night, when the house was quiet and the fancy lights in Medina made the sky look like a polished ceiling instead of a dome, Kendra lay awake and let possibility roll around her mouth like a word she couldn't translate yet. In the dark, she told Dorothy about it. How weird it felt to plan a future when every plan had once been a liability. How strange to not plan for disaster as the only reasonable outcome. 8 months after that first rainy night, when the ant trails of routine had formed into something like a map, Julian knocked on the door to his office and called her in. "I want to show you something," he said, the nervousness of a man about to ruin or remake a life threaded through his voice. On the screen were slides, a name, the Amara Cross Foundation, housing, job training, mental health services, a tiny home village on a vacant lot near the Duwamish where blackberry brambles had choked a forgotten triangle of land. The whole thing drawn in a series of hopeful renderings, cedar siding, little porches, planters overflowing with herbs, a community kitchen, a clinic, a play area. "I want to do more," he said, and the more landed not as a rescue fantasy, but as a calling. "I want to make something that outlives me, and I want you to help me run it, not as a figurehead, as my partner, because you know what hurt feels like and what hope costs." Kendra stared at the screen and at him and back at the screen. A heat rose in her chest that wasn't panic or shame or fear. It was possibility. "You trust me with that?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." "You're strongest where I'm blind. I want your eyes on everything." She thought of the girl at the bus stop who would have said no, because no was safer than yes. She thought of the notebook on her nightstand and her list of things that looked like a life. She thought of Dorothy's voice. "Better isn't easy, but it's worth it." "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." The first village went up in a patchwork of rain and sun and the stubborn optimism of people who've slept sitting up and still believe in beds. Volunteers came on Saturdays with hammers and lunches in coolers, and the sound of saws and laughter threaded together. Former Harborview patients showed up because Kendra had once held their hands and word had gotten out. A man with prison tattoos that told an old story offered to dig post holes all day because his back was strong. A grandmother who'd lost her apartment to a rent hike brought pies she could ill afford to bake. Kendra wore work gloves and an old UW hoodie someone had donated years ago, and she wasn't precious about anything. She carried plywood. She measured twice. She learned to use a nail gun and made friends with the inevitable bruises. She kept an eye out for people who shrank at loud noises, who flinched when a nail misfired, who hovered at the edges uncertain if they were allowed. She walked them in and put a tool in their hand and said, "You belong here," and watched belonging start. That's where she met him. He had a pencil behind his ear and a line of sawdust on his jaw like chalk. He was tall and handsome and black with warm eyes, wearing a beanie that had seen better days and a smile that didn't push. He was kneeling on a subfloor when he glanced up. "You're Kendra Cross, right?" He stood and offered a gloved hand. "I'm Devin Hayes. I drew those," he said, nodding at the tiny homes like someone talking about nieces. "You're the architect," she said, accepting his hand. His grip was warm even through the glove. "Thank you for making these look like dignity and not punishment." He laughed softly, surprised by the directness, like he'd been dying for someone to say it out loud. "That's the job," he said. "Beauty is a form of respect." They worked side by side that first Saturday, their conversation easy, conducted around measurements and questions about joist hanger placement and where to put the outlets. He didn't rush to the personal. He didn't probe. He asked if she needed water like he meant it and let silence be comfortable. At the end of the day, as people packed up body-tired and flushed, he slid off his work gloves and asked, casual as a man who wasn't trying to corner anything, "Would you want to get coffee sometime?" No pressure. If no is perfectly fine. 6 months ago, before the house in Medina, before therapy, before Dee stopped bracing at every kindness, she would have said no as a reflex. A no that sounded like safety but was really fear with a better outfit. Now yes didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like a step. "Coffee would be nice," she said. He grinned. The kind of grin that made you think of open windows and clean sheets and laughter that starts before it has a reason. Great. My favorite place is on Rainier, he said. The Ethiopian spot past the light rail. Next Saturday? Next Saturday, she said. That night, at Wednesday dinner, Kendra told Julian and Grace about the architect with sawdust on his jaw. Grace squealed as if she'd been personally invited, and Julian's smile did the same quiet thing it had done the first time she mentioned nursing school. You deserve happiness, he said, and didn't overstep. He didn't tell stories about his own dating life, such as it wasn't. He didn't make a joke. He just let his daughter be a woman making a choice. When Saturday came, Devon held the door to the cafe and stood aside like an old-fashioned gentleman who'd grown up in a world where gentleness was side like an old-fashioned gentleman who'd grown up in a world where gentleness wasn't a liability. They ordered macchiatos and shared a plate of sambusas that dripped onto napkins, and laughed about how they'd both been told by elders not to waste napkins. He asked about nursing school without making it about her past. She asked about architecture without assuming anything about his childhood. I started in commercial, he said. Got tired of designing glass boxes that priced teachers out of neighborhoods they built. So now I donate a third of my hours to housing that keeps people in place. My mother thinks I should charge more. She's not wrong. She told him about Dorothy, about the purple sweater, about the first time Grace fell asleep with her head in Kendra's lap during a cartoon, and how the weight of that small, trusting head had undone her. He walked her back to her car and didn't assume a thing. He didn't kiss her. He asked if he could call her, and when she said yes, he called 3 days later, not 2, not 1, not some game, just a Wednesday. By the time summer's light stretched late and found its way across Medina lawns and Rainier rooftops and the Duwamish's stubborn water, they had become something. Not a whirlwind, not a cliff, a steady path, a kindness she hadn't known could be equal to heat. Kendra's life didn't simplify because she fell in love. The foundation demanded long days and harder decisions than she'd imagined. People to approve for housing when there weren't enough units, staff to hire with the right combination of compassion and boundaries, city meetings where she had to translate, survival into policy in rooms where people pretended the city wasn't bleeding. Nursing school applications took shape on the dining room table with Grace, doing multiplication, both of them chewing pencils and arguing with registration forms that demanded proof of residence like the last 6 months. Had been a fever dream she'd dreamt instead of a life she'd lived. But the days built on each other and made something like a home. In September, they held the ribbon cutting for the village. The mayor said some words. Reporters took photos. Kendra spoke last, her palms damp, her heart hammering calm into place. Home is a lock that turns from the inside, she said, and people nodded. The way people nod when they recognize their own lives in a sentence. Thank you for helping us turn locks. After, Devon found her near a planter box where cilantro and basil were already throwing scent into the air and said, You did good, Kendra, and the words hit harder and sweeter than praise she'd gotten from any stranger, any donor, any official. It was being seen by someone whose eyes didn't flinch at the birthmark or the bus stop or the word homeless. A year to the week after the rainy night, the foundation hosted its first gala. At a waterfront venue with glass that turned Elliott Bay into a backdrop, Julian bought a suit the color of midnight and pretended he didn't care. Grace wore a white dress with a ribbon that matched Kendra's gown, which was a deep, elegant blue that caught the light when she moved. Helen cried when she saw them, fussed with Julian's tie, wiped a thumb at a smear of lipstick on Kendra's cheek like she'd been doing it since kindergarten. Backstage, Kendra felt the old panic at the edge of the stage, the one that says, Who do you think you are? But that voice was quieter now and had learned to yield to other voices. Dorothy's, Dr. Okafor's, her own. Julian found her in the wings, straightening cufflinks that didn't need straightening. You didn't survive for the applause, he said. You survived to turn on lights for people still sitting in the dark. She nodded, swallowed, stepped into the lights. She told the room about rain that felt like needles and a bus stop that felt like a final choice, about a man who didn't drive past, who held an umbrella over her head while he stood in the storm, about a birthmark that looked like a tiny moon and turned out to be a map. She didn't prettify homelessness. She named its cruelty and its boredom and its sense of becoming see-through to people whose eyes slid away. She didn't make herself a saint. She told the truth. And when she said, Everyone deserves to be seen, the room stood because standing felt like the only possible reply. After, in a quiet hallway, Devin found her. He didn't quite touch her. He didn't have to. His face said everything he might have fumbled for words to say. "Proud of you," he said finally, and she nodded because anything else would have cost more breath than she had. Grace barreled in. "You were amazing," she declared, and then asked if there were more mini desserts because she'd seen someone with a plate, and did they get seconds, and the moment cracked its own solemnity into laughter the way families do. When the night ended and the coat check replaced borrowed feathers with wool, Kendra stood by the glass and watched rain hit the black water, umbrellas bobbing on the sidewalk outside like little dark stars. "I used to hate the rain," she said quietly, and Julian heard even though she hadn't meant him to. "Now it reminds me that things grow." He didn't say anything. He just stood next to his daughter and watched the water with her. 2 days after the gala, Kendra woke before the house and drove into the city while the streets were still rinsing themselves clean. Fifth Avenue was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that remembers what it was like before the day puts on its noise. She parked a block away and walked to the bus stop where everything had once ended and begun. The bench was just a bench again. Ads had changed. A poster for a streaming show had replaced a campaign for shoes she hadn't been able to imagine wearing. The city's breath fogged in the cold. Kendra stood there for a moment, letting the rain beat on her coat. She reached into her pocket and set something on the green metal slat, 43 cents in coins, warm from her hand. A dime, a quarter, a nickel, 3 pennies. She had counted them on that night like a sentence. Now she left them like punctuation, proof that some stories get new endings. She slid a note beneath the coins, anchored under the quarter. "For whoever needs it, you are seen. Keep going. K." She didn't wait to see who found it. She touched the crescent on her wrist and walked back to her car. Harborview was next. The emergency department doors opened with their familiar whisper, and the smell of antiseptic rose up like a memory of a life she'd lived in 2 different acts. Kendra paused at the threshold, because thresholds matter, then stepped in. "Hi," she said to the triage nurse at the desk, a woman with box braids and a tired smile who had the posture of someone who had said, "You're safe now," more times than she'd counted. "I used to work here, as a CNA, a long time ago. I was left here when I was 2 days old. Someone picked me up. Someone cared for me. I don't know who. I just wanted to leave a thank you note, if that's all right." The nurse's face changed in that subtle way only nurses manage, softer without dissolving. "We can't give you names," she said gently. "Privacy laws. But you can leave your note. We'll make sure it lives in the right place." Kendra wrote at a corner desk with a pen attached to a chain. She kept it simple. "To the person who lifted me and didn't put me down, thank you. I'm alive. I'm home. Your kindness rippled for 28 years, and then some. With love, Kendra, who was baby girl once." The nurse offered to take it. Kendra thanked her and walked back into the gray morning and felt something unhook and release. The sort of relief that comes when a door you'd assumed was locked opens quietly. The city went about its business. Kendra went about hers. The foundation settled into a rhythm that felt like heartbeat, intake meetings, resident check-ins, board calls, supply inventories, city paperwork. That never lived on just one page, and then the joy, keys handed over. Laughter from porches, the click of locks turning from the inside. Julian's workdays went back to being long and his evenings to being intentional. Grace finished out 2nd grade with a love letter to math that would have made Grapes proud. And on a soft evening in August, Devin took Julian for a walk around the koi pond like a man who understood that. Asking for someone's blessing wasn't about permission so much as respecting the architecture of a family. They sat on the stone bench where Kendra had once told the truth about anger and had been met with the truth about regret. The fish flashed gold and white below the surface, unbothered by the ritual. "I love your daughter, Mr. Cross," Devin said simply, hat in his hands, like he was telling the sky something the sky already knew. "I love her in ways I can show my whole life. I'd like to ask her to marry me. I'm not asking you to give her away. I'm asking if you'll stand with us when we choose each other." Julian swallowed around the quick thread of tears. He studied Devin the way a father studies a bridge he's about to lead his child across. He found strength where lesser men performed it. He found steadiness. He found kindness that didn't need a stage. "She laughs more with you in the room," Julian said after a beat. "That's the only metric I've ever trusted. You have my blessing, and you have my phone number, in case you ever need me at 2 a.m. Devin grinned. Thank you. For her and for this. Julian clasped his shoulder. Make it about her. Keep making it about her. The rest follows. 2 weeks later, Grace lured Kendra to the tiny home village on a pretense so earnest it barely qualified as subterfuge. We have to check the community garden, she said, vibrating with a kind of excitement that made words bump into each other. The tomatoes are doing a surprise. The sun was slipping down behind the warehouses, the sky a canvas of orange and rose. The courtyard hummed with the low music of evening, a couple on a stoop swapping stories, someone laughing on a phone call, hand over their mouth like joy needed privacy, the clang of a pan in the communal kitchen, wind and prayer flag someone had tied to a railing. String lights had been draped along the eaves, the soft kind that make everyone look beloved. Photos hung from twine between 2 posts, clothes pinned like prayer flags of another kind. Kendra at the bus stop in a news story photo she had consented to use after much thought, Kendra in the purple sweater, Kendra and Grace under a blanket fort, Kendra in a hard hat, Kendra on stage at the gala, Kendra laughing, Kendra crying, Kendra living. Devin stood in the center of it all with sawdust still clinging to his sleeve as if he'd run out of time to be perfect. He said, suddenly shy. Grace did that. The pictures. She also told me to hide, but I failed. Grace darted forward to grab Kendra's hand. I'm stage manager, she whispered loudly. Kendra turned in a slow circle, taking in the faces. The residents who had come out to lean on porch rails, Helen, and Tasha pretending they hadn't been crying. Julian in a navy sport coat that looked better with smile lines. Devin stepped closer. His voice was steady, his hands only just not. I fell in love with you at inconvenient speeds, he said, a grin flickering. I fell in love with the way you turn pain into purpose, with the way you teach math with grapes and patience, with the way you listen all the way through, with the way you refuse to walk past someone on a bench, with how you make a place feel like home just by standing in it. He took a breath, and the courtyard held it with him. I don't want to fix you. I don't want to be your answer. I want to be your partner. I want to build ordinary days so beautiful we have to laugh at our luck. Kendra Cross, will you marry me? He knelt, not like a prince, but like a man who understands that the ground is sacred when a life is being asked. The ring was simple and stunning, a thin gold band, a diamond that caught the light without trying to be the light. Kendra looked at Devin, at Grace's wet eyes, at Julian, who had his hand over his mouth in a way that made him look suddenly young, at the photos flapping softly in the breeze like the past waving its blessing. Yes, she said, like an exhale she didn't know she'd been holding. Yes. The courtyard erupted. Cheers, applause. Someone whooped from the far end with a pan in their hand. Grace flung herself around Kendra's waist, then around Devin's. Does this mean I'm maid of honor? She demanded, damp-cheeked and triumphant. Obviously, Devin said gravely. We couldn't do this without our stage manager. Julian stepped forward, moving slowly, like he knew his heart might get there before his feet. He hugged his daughter and whispered something only she heard, something that made her nod with her whole body. Then he shook Devin's hand and didn't let go for a second longer than necessary. Helen produced cupcakes from nowhere because Helen was a magician. Tasha put on a song that made even the porch leaners move their shoulders. Residents came up one by one to hug Kendra, or bump fists or offer quiet words. You gave me a key. Thank you. You remembered my daughter's birthday. Thank you. You saw me when I didn't want to be seen. Thank you. Later, when the lights had been wound up again, and Grace had been poured into bed half asleep and sticky. With frosting, Kendra stood with Julian in the kitchen, the island a mess of paper plates and crumbs. My girl, Julian said, and then had to stop, the words outpacing the breath. You found love that doesn't ask you to be less. That's everything I ever wanted for you, even when I didn't know your name. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. Dorothy used to say, better isn't easy, but it's worth it. Julian nodded. Dorothy was always right. Wedding planning spilled into the weeks like confetti. Kendra didn't want a spectacle, and she didn't want to disappear. What she wanted was a ceremony that felt like breathing in unison, not like a performance. They chose the garden at Julian's house because it felt like the heart of this new thing, and because the koi pond had held so many truths already. Grace chose lavender for the flowers because it matched her room. Tasha found a seamstress in Columbia City who altered a simple satin gown into something that looked like it was made for Kendra's body and no one else's. Devon got fitted for a suit in a small shop on Rainier where the owner measured him with a tape like a blessing and told him he had lucky shoulders. Helen orchestrated the reception with military precision and a grandmother's softness. On a trial run Saturday, Kendra and Devon stood in the garden where they would say their vows and watched. Grace walked down the flagstone path with a basket of petals she threw like she was inventing a new game. "This is going to be good," Devon murmured, and Kendra could only nod, because any attempt at language would have turned into a rainstorm. The week before the wedding, Kendra drove to Cary Park with Grace while the sun was still thinking about setting. The city leaned itself against the sound, the Space Needle peeking over the skyline like a shoulder. They ate ice cream that dripped down their knuckles and took a picture that would end up on the mantle for decades, Kendra's chin on Grace's head, both laughing, the city behind them like a promise. The morning of the wedding dawned soft and golden, clouds like sheer curtains around the sky. Kendra dressed in the room that had once been a guest suite and was now just her room when she needed it. Helen pinned a small crescent charm into the lining of her gown, the gold glinting like a secret. "Something borrowed," Helen said, her voice warm. "Something true." Tasha did her makeup with the lightest hand, refusing to let anyone erase a single freckle. "You'll glow on your own," she said. "We're just reminding the sun where to look." Julian stood outside the door in a suit that made him look like a man in a photograph, the kind you keep in your wallet. He knocked twice, and then, because ritual matters, said, "Are you ready?" Kendra opened the door and watched her father forget how to breathe for a heartbeat. "You look like your mother and exactly like you," he said, voice thick. She took his arm. "Keep me steady," she whispered. "Always," he said. They walked out into the garden, petals underfoot, friends and family standing, because standing was all their bodies knew to do in the face of this. Devon waited by the koi pond, his hands clasped, his eyes doing a lot of work. Julian kissed Kendra's cheek, and then, in a gesture that made the air change, he took both her hand and Devon's and placed them together. "No one is giving anyone away," he said softly, just loud enough for them both to hear. "We're making a family." The vows were simple and wholly theirs. They promised ordinary miracles, to tell the truth on the days they'd rather be clever, to ask for help before the wheels came off, to leave the porch light on, to make soup. They promised to keep choosing each other when the world made it easier not to. When the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Devon looked like he couldn't. I'd believe his luck, and then kissed Kendra the way a man kisses his future. The reception was laughter under string lights, the clink of glasses, the taste of lemon cake. Julian danced with Grace to a song that had been on the radio when he was a teenager. Tasha took over and taught them both a step they pretended to learn for the first time. Residents from the village came and took their place around the tables like the family they were. Late in the evening, when the sky had deepened and the neighbors, fairy lights were little constellations through hedges, Kendra and Devon snuck down to the koi pond and stood there barefoot on the grass. Because standing still sometimes requires a ritual of its own. "We did it," Devon said. "We did it," Kendra echoed, and felt the word click into place like a key turning. Autumn tucked itself into their routines, then winter, then spring. Wednesday dinners at Julian's became sacred in the unshowy way that sacred things are. They ate roasted chicken and exactly the right amount of garlic mashed, potatoes, and argued about whether Monopoly was a game or a petty war. They transitioned to charades when Grace started bending the rules with such creativity it belonged in a museum. The foundation opened a second village near the ship canal, a perpendicular grid of little houses that made the city's map feel more like a quilt. Summer came, and with it a late afternoon where Kendra held a thin plastic stick in a bathroom. That smelled like eucalyptus and knew the answer before the second line bloomed. She stared at the lines, and then at the mirror, and then at the crescent on her wrist, touching it lightly. "Devon?" She called, and he came in, eyes already asking. She held it up. He held his breath, and then her, joy washing through the room like light-lifting dust. He laughed into her hair and then cried a little, and she did too. "We're going to need more grapes," he said when he could speak, "for math and for snacks." They told Julian at Wednesday dinner, because there are moments that only belong at that table. Grace heard first, because she always did, and squealed so loudly Helen scolded her fondly. Julian leaned back, closed his eyes, and let his face do a thing that looked like release and prayer and awe all at once. "A grandfather," he said softly, as if saying it too loudly might scatter it. "I'm going to be a grandfather." As summer swelled into September, Kendra and Devon painted the nursery a soft yellow, the kind that holds light like a secret. They pulled an old rocking chair out of the attic and sanded it together, laughing at splinters and memories that hadn't happened yet. Grace brought over a drawing with 6 figures and a baby in the middle labeled and careful, printing Daddy Julian, Aunt Kendra, Uncle Devin, Grace, Helen, Aunt Tasha, and baby. "We need room for one more," Kendra said, pointing to the blank edge. She drew a tiny crescent shape in the corner of the page and wrote Amara and Dorothy above. It, and then, because names are anchors, she said them out loud into the quiet room. The sound settled like blessing. Pregnancy made the world feel newly literal. Food tasted like food again. Sleep was sleep, not escape. Kendra kept a notebook of tiny, ordinary miracles. The first flutter that felt like a fish turning in a bowl, the way Devin's hand learned the shape of her belly, how Grace whispered secrets to the bump as if the baby could keep them. At her first prenatal visit at UW Medical Center, a sonographer slid cool gel across her stomach and turned the screen so Kendra could see the gray constellation of a profile, a nose, a fist, a heartbeat that sounded like a small, determined horse. "That's you," Kendra whispered, tears tracking down into her hairline. "That's you." Devin squeezed her hand and didn't pretend not to cry. The OB reviewed labs, measured fundal height, asked about nausea and swelling and fears. Kendra told the truth the way therapy had taught her to. "My grandmother died fast, and it shook me," she said. "And Grace's mother, there were complications. We're scared, and we're also hopeful. I want a plan. I want to know who I call at 2 a.m. I want to know what's normal and what isn't." The doctor nodded like a metronome. "We'll make a plan," she said. "You'll call us at 2 a.m. and at noon and at 3 if you need to. We're here." Kendra walked out with a packet of information and a sense that this time the scaffolding would hold. The foundation kept pulsing. The second village near the ship canal welcomed its first residents, and Kendra marked the day by leaving a basket of herbs on a communal table with a note that said, "For soups and for joy." The board approved a pilot program for job training in partnership with a local contractor. Devin's idea, quietly offered, immediately useful. Julian learned to say no to certain meetings so he could say yes to Grace's school play and Kendra's appointments, and the company did not implode, proof that some stories about success are only stories. One Saturday in late spring, the tiny home village threw a baby shower because community is a verb. Residents hung a line across the courtyard and clipped onesies to it with clothespins. Helen made a punch that tasted like summer remembered. Tasha led a game that made Kendra laugh so hard she needed to sit down. A woman who had moved in 2 months earlier after a year of sleeping in a car presented. Kendra with a crocheted blanket in a yellow so soft it felt like a whisper. "You don't know me," the woman said, eyes bright. "But you saw me. I wanted to make something that would keep seeing your baby." Kendra cried, and no one tried to fix it. At home, pregnancy turned the small house she and Devin had chosen into a place that hummed with anticipation. The nursery walls wore their soft yellow like light from the inside. A second-hand rocking chair, sanded and polished by their 4 hands, waited in the corner. On a shelf, a small framed photo of Amara held the space for a woman Kendra would never meet and would always carry. Julian tried not to hover and failed beautifully. He stocked their kitchen with groceries without comment. He replaced the batteries in their smoke detectors. He pretended to stop by to return a book and then stayed to install a car seat with a seriousness that made Grace salute him. He was different now than the young man who had signed papers he couldn't unsign. He knew the names of the things he feared. He said them out loud. And when Kendra caught him standing in the nursery doorway one afternoon, his face unguarded, she stepped into the frame with him and took his hand. "We're okay," she said softly. "I know," he said. And then, "Thank you for letting me be here for this." Summer crept in with a stretch of blue days, the air warm and forgiving. Kendra moved slower and learned to leave earlier. Devin talked to the baby in a voice that made the nursery feel like a well. Grace sang lullabies she made up on the spot that rhymed because she demanded it. Labor announced itself in the language of all beginnings, unexpected and exactly on time. It was a Sunday before dawn, rain soft against the windows, the city quiet. Kendra woke to a pressure that felt like a hand at the small of her back, and a wave that circled and receded. "Devin," she said, calm and startled all at once. "I think it's time." They moved through the checklist they'd taped to the refrigerator, because lists make courage into steps. Bag by the door. Charger. ID. Car seat. Called Julian and Helen and Tasha. Call Dr. Okafor, because Kendra wanted her voice on the voicemail saying, "You've got this," for later when the room got loud. At UW Medical Center, the triage nurse met them with the kind of efficiency that reads as kindness when you need it to. Kendra's body knew what to do. Devon's hand found the exact pressure point in her palm and held. Hours bent and became malleable in that way hospitals teach you, time measured in breaths and centimeters instead of minutes. Kendra dropped into herself, into the narrow passage of pain that was also a corridor of purpose. The nurse's voice, low and even, offered instructions like stepping stones. Devon counted when counting mattered, went silent when silence was necessary, breathed with her like he was born knowing how. In the waiting room, Julian sat with Grace and Helen and Tasha, elbows on knees, hands clasped, a man learning to be still. Grace's head nodding against his shoulder, waking, dozing, waking. He prayed in a way that bore no resemblance to any church he'd ever attended, wide, wordless, the shape of a father's plea. Morning lifted itself over the city, rain lightened. The world in the delivery room concentrated to one point. Push when you need to, the midwife said, and Kendra did, and did again and then again, bringing forward a cry that split the air and stitched it back together. "She's here," someone said, and then corrected themselves, habit yielding to accuracy. She's here because Kendra was the one who had brought her. A small, wet body, a voice like a trumpet, a face that already looked like a person instead of an idea. They placed the baby on Kendra's chest, and the world rearranged itself around this new coordinate. "Hello," Kendra said, dazed and clear, laughter and tears braided together. "Hi, baby." Devon kissed Kendra's forehead, and then the baby's, his hands shaking in a way that made him laugh at himself. "She's perfect," he said, and Kendra nodded because there was no other word. "What's her name?" the nurse asked gently, as if names were sacred and had to be invited carefully. Kendra looked at Devon and saw the answer reflected back. "Amara Dorothy," she said, the names full and round in her mouth. Amara for the mother who began the story. Dorothy for the woman who taught her how to write it. Amara Dorothy Cross-Hayes. They weighed her, wrapped her in a hospital blanket patterned with tiny feet, returned her to Kendra like a feast to its table. Kendra traced the baby's cheek with a fingertip, and then, inevitable as breathing, turned Amara's left wrist to see. The skin was smooth, unmarked. No crescent moon. Kendra felt the tug of old stories and then felt them loosen. "You don't need it," she whispered to her daughter, a smile she couldn't help spilling across her face. "Your story has its own map." Later, when they were in a recovery room filled with the soft noises of a new life, tiny breaths, a squeak that sounded like a question, the quiet slip of a nurse checking vitals, Julian came in with Grace tiptoeing, although no one had asked her to. He stopped 3 steps inside the door and put a hand over his mouth the way he had at the proposal, the way men do when they're trying to keep their hearts from tumbling out of them. "Can I?" he asked, suddenly formal. Kendra beckoned him closer and placed his granddaughter in his arms. He held her like a man carrying water across a desert. He cried without apology. "Hello, little one," he said, voice low and reverent. "I'm your granddad. I've been waiting for you without knowing it." Grace climbed onto the chair and peered into the blanket. "She's so tiny," she whispered, eyes wide. "Hi, Amara. I'm your Aunt Grace. I will teach you everything important, like how to win at charades without cheating." Devon sat on the edge of the bed, his hand on Kendra's ankle, grounding them both. Tasha came in with flowers and jokes and a tissue she pretended was for someone else. Helen stood by the window and watched rain thread down the glass and smiled like the weather had finally remembered how to be useful. The next day, Julian's parents arrived with a knitted bonnet and the kind of careful excitement people bring when they know they have a lot to hold and very little right to it. They looked older than they had months ago, softened by regret and by practice at making amends. Kendra placed Amara in her grandmother's arms and watched the woman's face collapse into awe. "We don't deserve this," his mother said quietly. "Maybe not," Kendra said, and then, because truth and kindness can share a sentence, added, "But she does. She deserves the whole family." They nodded and cried and didn't make speeches, and the room felt larger for what it didn't have to hold. That night, when the hospital grew quiet in the way only hospitals know how, Kendra watched her daughter sleep and saw herself in a bed 28 years ago, swaddled and unnamed, a nurse lifting her into a life and then into a system, and then into a woman's arms who would teach her everything worth knowing. She thought of Julian, 22 and wrecked, signing papers with hands that shook. She thought of Amara, exhausted and alight, saying hope, because naming can be an act of rebellion. She thought of Dorothy, setting a crib in a one-bedroom apartment and making it enough. Anger did not evaporate under the heat of motherhood. It softened, found edges she hadn't noticed, made room for 1,000 other feelings that could live in the same house without crowding one another. Forgiveness, she realized, was less like a gate and more like a garden, something tended, something seasonal, something that would always need water and light and work. She touched the crescent on her own wrist and felt it as both story and skin. Then she closed her eyes and slept the sleep of women who have brought someone through. Part 2 to 4. The world did not split open to accommodate Amara. It expanded. Wednesday dinners at Julian's continued with a new seat and a new rhythm. A bassinet took up residence next to the table like a small boat in a warm harbor. Grace learned to burp a baby with a confidence that made nurses grin. Helen baked more than she had in years and pretended it was for reasons other than the joy of feeding people who would never stop being her people. Tasha's camera reappeared, catching moments that would later look like a documentary of a family becoming itself. Sundays grew into something else, slower, wider. Breakfast bled into midday. The front door swung on its hinges without knocking because some doors are supposed to. Julian grilled salmon in the backyard in a rain jacket because Seattle refuses to be scheduled by the weather. Friends drifted in. Residents from the village came by with news. The table stretched. The house held. Kendra returned to the foundation after leave in a way that did not require her to pretend she was the same. She brought Amara to meetings in a sling that left her hands free and her heart occupied. Residents who had lost children and those who had chosen not to have them held the baby with equal tenderness. And Kendra saw again what she already knew. Family is found and made and chosen as often as it is born. On a Tuesday, a young woman came to intake with a backpack that had seen too much rain and eyes that had learned to scan rooms for exits. Kendra sat with her and offered water and did not rush the quiet. She asked the questions the form required and then asked the ones survival required. When the woman finally looked up and said, "I haven't been called by my own name in weeks," Kendra said, "Let S start there then," and wrote it on the top of the page in her neat hand as if ink could make it more real. Devin moved through their home with the contentment of a man who had made a life with his hands and his choices. He read good books out loud in a voice Amara would one day remember without remembering why. He changed diapers with the efficiency of a contractor who respected corners. He loved Kendra in the daily way. Coffee poured into the mug she liked, a hand at the small of her back when she stood too long, a reminder to breathe when the weight of other people's stories pressed too hard. Nursing school acceptance arrived on a clear morning in a white envelope that made Grace dance around the kitchen. Kendra read the letter, laughed, pressed it to her chest, and then set it on the fridge where it became a small sun. The house rearranged itself around class schedules and foundation meetings and naps. It worked because they worked at it. Months layered themselves, then a year, then another half. The foundation cut the ribbon on a third village. Kendra stood at the podium with Amara on her hip and spoke about dignity and doors that lock from the inside and the arithmetic of hope. She did not lose her temper in city meetings even when patience would have been a firework because she had learned that sometimes quiet was the sharpest tool. A Sunday evening in winter, the city rinsed itself with rain and softened the streetlights into halos. Dinner at Julian's had stretched past dessert into board games, then into something better. Stories that end with everyone laughing and no one able to remember the beginning. Kendra stood at the sink rinsing plates while Helen pretended to disapprove and actually appreciated the help. Julian rocked Amara near the fireplace and hummed something that was almost a song. Grace built a block tower with ruthless focus and then knocked it down because destruction is also a kind of joy. Devin came up behind Kendra and wrapped his arms around her, his chin on her shoulder, his warmth a punctuation mark. "What are you smiling about?" He murmured into her hair. "Everything," she said, and it was not hyperbole. It was inventory. They ate late and lingered later. Tasha took a picture. Kendra and Devin and Amara, Julian and Grace, Helen in the corner pretending not to pose, the table crowded, with hands and plates and a life that looked like it had not always been this way, and now could not imagine being otherwise. After, Kendra drove home slowly, the wipers shushing the windshield. The city stretched out like a familiar story. She passed Fifth Avenue and glanced, because certain places tug your chin like old friends. At a bus stop, a woman sat hunched under a too-thin jacket, a backpack at her feet, the rain determined. People walked by with their heads down, their lives loud. Kendra's hands turned the wheel before she had time to turn the thought. She pulled over. She reached for the umbrella in the back seat because she kept one there now, always. She stepped out into the rain and crossed to the bench. The woman flinched and then steadied herself, eyes wary. "Hey," Kendra said, voice low and ordinary, the way you talk to a skittish animal you want to invite without trapping. "Are you all right?" The woman's mouth twisted into a smile that wasn't. "I'm fine," she said, which meant the opposite. Kendra opened the umbrella over the woman, letting her own shoulders soak. "My name is Kendra," she said. "I run a program a mile from here. There's a warm bed and a hot meal with your name on it if you want it. No strings. I'll drive you, and if you want to leave after, I'll bring you back. Your pace." The woman studied her the way Kendra had studied Julian once, testing the edges of possibility. Rain threaded the silence into something that could hold them both. "What's the catch?" the woman asked, because safety required the question. "No catch," Kendra said. "Just this. Someone stopped for me once. It changed my life. Let me return the favor." The woman stared at the umbrella and then at Kendra's face and then at the hand. Kendra had not yet extended because sometimes help needs a second invitation. "Okay," the woman said finally, and in the span of one word, a door opened. Kendra led her to the car and helped with the backpack. She turned the heater on high. The woman held her hands near the vents like a person remembering what warmth felt like. "What's your name?" Kendra asked, as they pulled into traffic. The woman hesitated, then said it like a challenge. "Ari. Nice to meet you, Ari. I'm glad you're here." They drove to the tiny home village, lights in the courtyard making pools of welcome on the wet ground. Helen, who managed intake on Sunday nights because she trusted her own barometer more than any system, opened the door to the community room with a smile that cut straight through to safe. They settled Ari into a small house with clean sheets and a lock that turned from the inside and a basket of toiletries on the dresser. Someone brought tea. Someone else brought soup. Ari sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped her hands around the mug, as if it were both heat and handle. Kendra stood in the doorway, not filling it, just holding the space open. "Thank you," Ari said, the words stiff with newness. "You're welcome," Kendra said. "We'll take it one step at a time. Your steps. If you need anything, press the button by the door. If you need nothing, sleep." Ari nodded, and Kendra stepped back into the rain, closing the door softly from the outside and hearing the soft, certain sound of the lock click from within. On the walk back to her car, Kendra touched the crescent on her wrist. The rain slicked her palm and made the skin shine. She thought of all the marks people carry that aren't on the surface. Scars no one sees, stories no one knows. We all have birthmarks, she thought. Not for the first time. Not for the last. Some visible, some invisible. Some we think are brands until they turn out to be maps. She looked up. The streetlight haloed the rain. Somewhere behind the clouds, the moon, full or a crescent or a sliver, was doing its ancient work of pulling tides and lighting paths. Kendra smiled into the weather and headed home, ready for the next ordinary miracle, the next warm room, the next door that would open because someone chose to stop and see. 2 years to the week after the bus stop, Sunday dinner at Julian's, had that lived-in sound Kendra loved, the clink of serving spoons. Against bowls, Grace's voice telling a story with hand motions too big for the table, Tasha's laughter coming in on the upbeats. Rain thinned to mist against the windows, soft enough that you heard it only when the house got quiet. Amara had discovered peas and was pursuing them with the doggedness of a scientist and the accuracy of a poet, which is to say, not at all. Devin intercepted the green escapees with 2 fingers and a grin. "You and these peas," he murmured to their daughter, who answered with a noise that had the shape of a word and the intention of a manifesto. Helen deposited a platter of salmon down like a gift and tapped Julian on the shoulder, shooing him out of the kitchen with the authority of a woman who'd earned the right to shoo. Kendra stood for a second at the threshold of the room and did the inventory. Her brain had taught her to do when joy made her suspicious. Elbows, smiles, napkins, steam rising from bowls. The bassinet had been replaced by a high chair with bite marks on the tray. On the far wall, the photo from Kerry Park, Kendra's chin on Grace's head, both of them laughing, sat in a frame. Next to a newer one of Devin in a paper crown at Amara's first birthday. Cake on his jaw like war paint. "What are you smiling about?" Devin asked, stepping in behind her. chin settling in the curve of her neck the way rivers find their way back to the sea. "Everything," she said, letting the word unfurl. "Absolutely everything." Julian caught her eyes. He handed Grace the bread basket and lifted one brow in a question he'd learned to ask without words. Kendra nodded. "Yes, good. Still good." He relaxed, imperceptibly, and turned back to a debate with Grace about whether garlic bread counted as a vegetable if it had parsley. After dinner, while charades devolved into interpretive dance Grace's influence, Kendra slipped down the hall to check on Amara. The nursery smelled like sleep and soap, soft and clean. Amara lay on her back, that generous baby belly rising and falling, fist curled around the corner of a yellow blanket crocheted by a woman who had once slept in a car and now watered herbs on a tiny porch she called hers. Kendra tucked the edge of the blanket around her daughter's shoulder. The crescent charm Helen had stitched into the hem of the crib sheet flashed briefly in the lamplight, then went still. Kendra touched the moon on her own wrist, skin on skin, story on story, and felt the map of it without needing a destination. On her way back to the kitchen, she paused at Julian's study door. The bracelet his mother had given her, the gold with the tiny crescent, rested in a shallow ceramic dish, catching the light the way memories do when you're not trying to make them perform. Next to it sat a photo of Amara the elder, laughing with her head tipped back as if the sky had said something funny. Kendra laid 2 fingers on the frame. "Thank you," she thought, and didn't need to decide whether she was speaking to Dorothy or to the woman in the photo or to the version of herself who had sat on a bench in the rain and decided that asking for help wasn't the same as giving up. Gratitude didn't care about the address. It found its way. Back at the table, Julian and Grace had shifted to Monopoly with ruthless gentility. Tasha documented the truce that followed a dice-related dispute. Helen pretended to complain about crumbs while smiling at a house that would never be too full. "We've got orientation at the village tomorrow," Devon said, leaning in. "You still want to speak?" "I do," Kendra said. Just a few words. She gave them the next day in the community room with the mismatched chairs and the posters the residents' kids had made that said welcome in handwriting that got bolder as the markers ran out. New volunteers sat with clipboards and good intentions. New residents sat with their backs to the wall, a habit that would take time to unlearn. Kendra stood at the front without a microphone because her voice didn't need one here. "I wish I could tell you this is easy," she began. "It isn't. Healing rarely is, but it's worth it. I know because I did it, am doing it still. 2 years ago, I was at a bus stop with 43 cents in my pocket and a backpack that held everything I owned. A stranger stopped and saw me. Not my situation, me. He held an umbrella over my head and stood in the rain. That was the beginning." She glanced at Julian, standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, listening like he was hearing it for the first time again. "You'll hear us say it a lot here. Home is a lock that turns from the inside. We can give you a key. We can fix the lock. We can stand outside your door and cheer when you close it for the first time and feel safe. The rest, turning that lock, opening it when you're ready, that's yours." She hesitated, then added the part she hadn't planned. "People talk about birthmarks like they're blemishes. I have one. A crescent moon on my wrist. For a long time, I thought it marked me as different in a way I had to hide. Turns out, it was a map. You have maps too. They might not be on your skin, but they're there. Scars and stories and stubborn hope. Follow them. We'll walk with you." After, a woman with wary eyes stopped her by the door and said, "I like the part about maps. I don't know mine yet." "That's okay," Kendra said. "Sometimes you find it by walking." That evening, as the city took the rain back and the streets shone the way Seattle streets do, like they've been polished by weather, Kendra drove home the long way. She passed the hospital where she'd been left and loved. She passed Pike Place, lights strung like a necklace. She passed the bus stop on 5th and didn't turn her head, not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it did and would, always. Some places become part of your spine. They don't need your eyes to stay. At home, Devon was at the counter, chopping herbs, the kitchen full of the smell of lemon and heat. Amara banged a wooden spoon on a pot like a drummer warming up for a lifetime of rhythm. Kendra set her bag down and stepped into the scene like she'd been rehearsing it in her bones long before she knew the dance. "What are you smiling about?" Devon asked, not looking up because he already knew. "Everything," she said. "Absolutely everything." Outside, the rain began again, a soft, steady sound, not a storm but something older. Kendra reached for the bracelet in her pocket and fastened it around her wrist, the tiny crescent glinting against the larger one stamped in skin. She lifted Amara, breathed in the warm, milky scent that made the word future feel like a fact, and sent up a quiet thank you that didn't ask for anything, only named what had been given, for rainy nights and kind strangers, for birthmarks that turn out to be maps, for second chances, for locks that click from the inside, for the people who refuse to walk past. She was home, finally, fully, forever home. And tomorrow, like every tomorrow now, had room for more. If this journey gave you something, do 3 things for me. Subscribe to Love and Twilights with Dr. Phillips so you never miss a story that reminds you what hearts are for. Share this video with one person who needs to believe that people can change. And tell me the moment that hit you hardest.